So far on the channel, I've taken a look back at one of my favourite childhood franchises, the Power Rangers. I've looked at pretty much every game from the Mighty Morphin era, minus a few of the Tiger handhelds, and in those videos I've always tried to put those games and the show that spawned them into context. The reason for that is because the storylines often get overly complicated. The first season alone has 60 episodes, and the show also uses recycled footage from the 16th season of a Japanese franchise called Super Sentai. Now, I've mentioned that before, but I've never really gone into too much detail about how the two shows differ from each other, or indeed how the two franchises differ from each other. And there's a good reason for that. It's because I never really knew what the differences were. We didn't have the internet growing up, and while I've seen bits of Super Sentai before, I never really dived into any of its shows. After all, the 16th season alone is an extra 50 episodes, and it's all in Japanese. But when I was doing research for my Power Rangers the movie video, and the ways in which the US show managed to cut and paste bits of footage from various different series of Super Sentai, I started to seek out subtitled episodes of the US show's Japanese counterpart. Now, I'd always just assumed that the shows were pretty much the same premise, but with a more Americanized cast and plot lines, but it's much more complicated than that. So, as a little extra, I'm putting aside the video games completely and focusing purely on the TV show. This is going to take a while. Now, the American show plays out a bit like a superhero story. We don't really get too much of a backstory about the main villains, nor the sentient being that controls the power which is used to defeat them. We get a quick view of some astronauts opening up a capsule on what we can assume is the moon, and a witch called Rita appears vowing to destroy the nearest planet, in this case, Earth. We're then introduced to a group of teenagers who are active in martial arts, dancing and gymnastics, as well as some comic relief in the form of two bumbling characters, Bulk and Skull, all wrapped up in a typically Saved by the Bell-esque juice bar. When Rita's return causes an earthquake, a sentient floating head calls on his assistant to teleport 5 overbearing and over-emotional humans, as he puts them, or in other words, teenagers. We don't really know why he wants teenagers specifically. Maybe that's just his thing. One look at his internet history would probably settle it. Although it's 1993 and there is no internet. And, you know, he's a disembodied floating head. Yeah, that joke doesn't really work, does it? Although it is somewhat touched upon in the pilot episode, but it's just a flimsy, I believe that children are the future kind of thing, sprinkled with a few generic compliments. We learn that this floating head's name is Zordon, an interdimensional being trapped in a time warp. The teenagers have been chosen to form an elite team to defeat Rita. They will be given great power, the ability to morph into Power Rangers and command things called Dinozords. Without really understanding why they've been chosen, they leave, only for Rita to send a group of putty patrollers to do away with them before they realise what powers they now possess. Eventually they figure out how to morph and try out their new Zords to defeat the bad guy and ultimately save the day. What follows for the next 60 episodes or so is a fairly repetitive plot of a wholesome group of young people being generally good people until Rita sends a new monster for them to battle, eventually needing to call on their Zords and its ultimate form, Megazord, to destroy it. So essentially it's a little bit like Green Lantern crossed with Iron Man. Normal humans are chosen by a greater power and given something which allows them to transform into armoured heroes. They can then call upon glorified tanks and use an ancient power. As the season goes on, a 6th Ranger is introduced. We're introduced to Tommy, a new kid at school who becomes a formidable foe for Jason in a martial arts competition. Tommy becomes possessed by Rita and given a lost power coin to become an evil form of the Green Ranger. As a Ranger, he's able to enter the command center and disable Zordon and Alpha. The other 5 Rangers must stop him before he and Rita are able to pick them off one at a time, before awakening the Dragon Zord to bring destruction to Earth. But after learning that Tommy is the one behind the green helmet, the other Rangers vow to help him to break the spell, eventually doing so and recruiting him to join them as a fully fledged Power Ranger, and also a teenage love interest for Kimberly. As they go into seasons 2 and 3, the producers had to find clever ways of mixing bespoke new footage with stock footage from various different series of Super Sentai. I go into more detail about this in my Power Rangers the movie video, but the thing to realise is, the original Power Rangers never really comes to an end. It's not until Power Rangers Lost Galaxy that a new rotation of casts starts to appear with each iteration, but even then past Rangers tend to return. But for the first 6.5 seasons or so, they periodically introduce new villains, new Zords, new powers. They do transfers of powers to new Rangers, or just slightly change the lineup. But Even when they eventually run out of ways of stretching out what they have around the end of Season 3, rather than just cutting ties and starting again, they wrote it into the storyline that the Rangers are turned into children and they have to search for the Zeo Crystal, and then they transition into a weird mini-series that uses alien Rangers, and footage from yet another Super Sentai series as they set up a reboot of the show with Power Rangers Zeo. But this is just treated like the next season, carrying on where the Mighty Morphin era left off, and so it just goes on and on, moving into Power Rangers Turbo and so on. Rita, Lord Zed and other villains also continue to appear in future series, although Rita continues to look younger and younger every time. As the seasons go on, many of the original Rangers from the Mighty Morphin era keep returning. Jason returns as the Gold Ranger in Power Rangers Zeo, albeit only briefly as his powers eventually fail. And then in Power Rangers in Space and in Operation Overdrive, Adam makes a return as the original form Black Ranger. Although I never really understood how, as in the beginning of Power Rangers Zeo, Zordon states that those Ranger forms are gone forever. They even state in Power Rangers in Space that the power coins are destroyed, but he just morphs anyway. They kind of get away with it though, because it only half works and he can't remain as the Black Ranger. I don't really see why he couldn't have just returned as the Green Zeo Ranger though, as those powers weren't destroyed, they were just replaced in the second movie, which, unlike the first movie, is actually canon to the TV show. But it doesn't end there. Jason makes another return, this time as the original Red Ranger, alongside Tommy as the Red Zeo Ranger in an episode of Power Rangers Wild Force. Although no mention of why his morpher suddenly starts working when Adams tried to kill him, not to mention the fact that Rocky should have it. Later, Tommy then resurfaces again in Power Rangers Dino Thunder, being acknowledged as the same Ranger from the Mighty Morphin era, although nobody questions why there's broadcast quality footage of all his actions as a Power Ranger. It's almost like it's a TV show or something. Tommy takes on the power again, becoming the Black Dino Thunder Ranger. At one point he's forced to face former versions of himself, although these are just visions whilst he's in a coma rather than actual returns of previous Rangers. At the end of the series, the Dino Gems lose their power and the Rangers move on with their lives, but Tommy somehow comes back again as the Black Ranger at the end of SPD, along with the other Dino Thunder Rangers, but I'll get back to that one. There's even an episode of Power Rangers Super Megaforce, released 11 years after the first season, which sees all generations of Rangers return. Tommy appears as the Green Ranger, which doesn't really make any sense, as the Green Ranger had already returned once before, but is an evil clone, who then turns good but goes back in time and decides to stay there. It already didn't make sense that he'd return once, as his powers were meant to be destroyed, but if he's returned again, technically this should be the clone, Tom, not Tommy, but Tom is stuck in colonial times. Plus, while the White Ranger's powers were destroyed, and so was the Black Dino Thunder Rangers, he could still have become the Red Zeo Ranger. Now the Zeo Rangers do actually make an appearance, and Adam returns as the Green Zeo Ranger this time, which you think would make sense, but actually makes even less sense, as in his second return in Operation Overdrive, the restoration of his Black Ranger powers was meant to be permanent this time. And how are the rest of the Dino Thunder Rangers back? Their Dino Gems lost their powers too. I think it has something to do with travelling back in time to bring them to fight in the future during the SPD era, but then they had their memories wiped and were left in the past, or their present, so their modern day selves would still be powerless, so how are they appearing in Super Megaforce? Ugh, this all hurts my head. Okay, let's just break this down a bit. So presumably this Black Ranger is Zack, and then this must be Jason, who is now the original Red Ranger again, as he was in Wild Force, even though we don't know how he got his powers back. Rocky, the second Red Ranger, can be seen here as the Blue Zeo Ranger, and the Pink Zeo Ranger must be Kat, which means Kimberly must now be the original Pink Ranger again, and Trini or Aisha, we can't be sure, is now the Yellow Ranger again. All of the Mighty Morphin era Rangers have regained powers that were meant to be destroyed, even though Adam actually did have his powers restored, only he's not with them, and instead appears as the Green Zeo Ranger. You see, it all just gets horribly complicated, trying to tie together 20-odd series of Power Rangers from 40-odd series of Super Sentai. It's all just a bit of a mess. Don't even get me started on the fact that the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles exist in the Power Rangers universe. But this isn't how things are done with Super Sentai. With the Zyuranger series, for example, from which Season 1 of Power Rangers is adapted, it's its own contained storyline. It also contains a lot more lore and much more detail into why things are the way they are, plus a lot more narrative throughout the series as well. Still with me? Okay, let's go. With Rita, for example, who is called Bandora in this version, rather than her origin story being handled too quickly, we get a full rundown of her return. A space shuttle is headed for the planet Nemesis, which passes by Earth every 23 million years. A group of astronauts, including 2 children for some reason, are travelling to the planet to explore. Once landed, they discover a capsule, which when opened, Bandora and her henchmen are freed. Rather than the 10,000 years that Rita was banished, Bandora has endured over 170 million years. As a token of her appreciation for freeing her, the astronauts are blown out into space and the children are kidnapped. And rather than waiting for any monsters to be made, she gets to work causing havoc on Earth herself, setting up her headquarters on top of a skyscraper, not on the moon like in the US show, although she does move this to the moon by episode 2. She's reacquainted with a familiar face, which we learn is called the White Wizard Barza. Now this is kind of our Zordon figure, except he's more of a protector of a shrine than a sentient being. We learn that not only does Bandora loathe the human race, but she particularly hates children, and one of her first acts will be to crush a shrunken space shuttle with the children still inside. We don't actually see her shrink the shuttle, but it's somehow turned into a miniature. To fight her, Barza takes a hidden route to an ancient monument, where he calls upon guardian beasts to reawaken ancient warriors called the Knights of the Five Clans, including a prince called Geki. We immediately see that these are not just teenagers that are into martial arts and gymnastics, they are indeed warriors, as they get to work on Bandora's clay doll henchmen, which we would know as the Putty Patrol, with their weapons of choice. FYI, the definitely not hand puppet versions never made an appearance in the US show. When Barza gives them their medallions, they are able to transform into the Rangers using their dino bucklers. When the Rangers attempt to save the kids in the shuttle, it's stolen by a giant monster, to be used later as bait in one of Bandora's evil schemes. And this is where, in episode 2, we get the origin story of the Knights of the Five Clans and how they sealed Bandora away on the planet Nemesis. 170 million years ago, humans apparently lived alongside dinosaurs and formed an ancient civilization made up of 5 clans, each clan having its own dinosaur guardian. Bandora waged war against humans and dinosaurs, for a reason we don't know yet, until the guardian beasts came to their rescue and helped them to seal Bandora in her capsule. Later, in episode 2, when the monster returns, we get a glimpse of the first returning guardian beast, the Tyrannosaurus, which Geki uses to destroy the monster. It's not until episode 6 that the Rangers learn that they need to recover dino crystals so that they can combine the guardian beasts. Geki's sword unveils where they have been buried in a quarry millions of years ago. Rather than simply some mechanical dinosaurs, the guardian beasts are almost spiritual beings, as is Daizujin, or Megazord as we would know him, who is even able to speak. In episode 17, we learn of a 6th Ranger, known as the Invincible Warrior. He had frozen himself when the others were frozen, and the date in which he can be revived has finally come. Only Barza doesn't want him revived, and initially we don't know why. However, once revived, he turns against the other Rangers. It's all a bit complicated, but essentially, Borai, or the Green Ranger, is actually Geki's older brother. The king of the tribe punished their father's lack of respect by taking Geki as his own adopted son, and therefore becoming prince. When the father tried to lead a rebellion, he was killed by the king, and Borai vowed revenge. Only Bandora attacked and killed the king herself, so Borai instead set his sights on Geki, hence why he had himself frozen. Bandora tries to recruit Borai to fight for her, but he's only interested in revenge for himself. Daizujin appears before Borai and Geki, prophesying that they will eventually be a team. It gets ever more complicated, but eventually Geki and Borai fight, and with Geki victorious, Borai forgives his brother and joins with the other Rangers. Only we don't know that he's actually dying due to complications of when he was frozen. It goes on until we get the final episodes where Borai eventually dies, leaving the Dragonzord Caesar in grief, which leaves Geki to take up his brother's shield and dagger to snap him out of it. We also learn that Bandora had a son, although he is oddly cold with her, and the tears that she sheds for the love of him as he eventually dies removes the evil magic that she was given. With that, Daizujin seals her in an urn and casts her out into space. And so, the Rangers have completed their mission and are free to leave Earth. Oh, and also bring dinosaurs back to life. Yeah, that was also a thing, I kind of glossed over that bit. Anyway, cue happy ending, everybody's jolly and relieved, and even Bandora loses her hatred for children when Japanese Guldar and the Scorpion Woman have a baby inside the urn. The Rangers ascend into the clouds or heaven or something, and the series ends. Yep, you thought the American show was out there, but it has nothing on the Japanese show. But at least there's a running narrative that actually comes to a conclusion. The American show never really goes anywhere. Once the producers of Power Rangers had cut out all the stuff that was very Japanese, was culturally specific, or was just plain bonkers, they were pretty much left with just the battle footage of the Rangers and the Zords. It was then up to them to try and craft a American kid-friendly show around it, and as such most of the episodes feel very similar, at least with the first season anyway. Not just that, but it never really ends. Every week there's just a new and weird monster to battle and it all gets wrapped up in 20 minutes, until eventually new Zords, new powers and new Rangers are gradually introduced, like the transition into Zyurangers between season 3 and 4. With the US show, a lot is assumed. For example, we never really know why each Ranger has a certain weapon. Zordon just decides that they could do with something extra to fight the enemy. As such, they don't really have much of an impact in the US show. Similarly, in Power Rangers, we don't really know why the Rangers need power crystals, or what they do, or why they're buried in a quarry for that matter. It's something about being able to find each other or something, I don't really know, it's all kind of just thrown together, especially as we've already seen the crystals in previous episodes because they threw Megazord at us in episode 1. In Zyuranger, they have a specific purpose. The Guardian Beasts cannot form Daisugen without them. In a lot of Super Sentai series, there also seems to be an emphasis on motorbikes. While they're common in the Japanese show, they don't really make an appearance in the US show at all. They do appear in the background of one episode, but aren't really referred to at all, although that didn't really stop Saban from turning it into a series of toys. They even made Thunder Bikes into a series of toys, and these weren't even based on the same season of Super Sentai. Although we did get some Shark Bikes partway through season 3, but these were unique to the US show. And we do also get bikes in a few of the other series. Also, we never really know who Rita is or why she is the way she is. Later on it turns out that she has an evil father, etc., and we get some kind of idea. But in Zyuranger it's pretty clear. Bandora, well, there's no easy way of putting this. She's kind of a Satanist, and that's where she gets her power. But it's not really Bandora's choice to serve Satan. It turns out that her son died in an encounter with a dinosaur, basically because he was being a dick, destroying eggs. And being so grief-stricken, she sold her soul to the devil to revive him. That's why she hates dinosaurs and the knights that are protected by them, and also why she resents children. And then, yes, there's also the weird subplot of dinosaur eggs and the beginning of a new dinosaur age, which obviously she doesn't want, seeing as that's what killed her son and condemned her to an eternity of evil. In the end, it's the power of love that defeats that evil, her unconditional love for her son despite literally going through hell and back to keep him alive. It's actually quite a nice message of love overcoming evil, although it's way too dark for a kids' show. I'm not surprised it got cut for Western audiences. In Power Rangers, Rita and Lord Zed just keep bouncing around space and time, causing havoc whenever they return. It's not until much later that they eventually get turned human, which incidentally is where Zordon dies after sacrificing himself. And then years later, Rita gains new powers, but this time to do good, now calling herself Mystic Mother. Although this isn't the same in Super Sentai, it's a completely different character from a non-related series. But it is the same actress who played Bandora, and also the original casting of Rita, as there were loads of Ritas due to the fact that she had to keep appearing over multiple series of Power Rangers. The actress who played her, Machiko Soga, actually appeared in quite a few series of Super Sentai, usually as a villain. The decision to acknowledge her as Rita in Power Rangers Mystic Force was partly as a tribute, as Soga had recently passed away. Once season 2 of the US show rolled around, the producers were filming a lot more bespoke footage with the American actors, which gave them room to develop the plot lines a bit more. However, they used the Zords and the White Ranger suit from the next season of Super Sentai, which actually has nothing to do with the series before it. The Thunder Zords that are introduced in season 2 of Power Rangers, along with the White Ranger that replaces Tommy's Green Ranger, are actually from Gosei Sentai Dai Ranger. And although it's the next in the series, it actually has absolutely nothing to do with the previous season, and it all starts again from scratch. Although while not connected, they may still be the same universe, as Super Sentai has its own crossovers, which again are technically canon but have their own continuity issues. Zyuranger sees a sensei called Kaku, who has selected a group of warriors who contain chi power to fight an evil group called Gorma. But that's a whole other story. All you need to know is that we missed out on this amazing theme tune. When you've watched both Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and Kyōryū Sentai Zyuranger, if that's how it's pronounced, you start to notice things that we just missed the first time around, like Jason being twice the size of Geki, Trini being half the size of Boy, and Tommy's shield looking like a Halloween costume when compared to Borai's. Not to mention little things like Barza appearing in the viewing globe and Tommy's transformation into the Green Ranger clearly not being the same actor. And can we just take a moment to appreciate one or two things about the US show? Now, we all know the joke about how they made the Black Ranger black and the Yellow Ranger Asian. Yes, yes, funny, funny. And while they fixed it with the old switcheroo, subbing in a black Yellow Ranger and a half Korean Black Ranger, they mess it all up again when they literally sent the only black person in the show back home to Africa. And I'm not making that up. They imply Aisha is related to a nomadic African villager, and she stays there to heal sick lions because of her knowledge gained from the saber-toothed tiger. What the actual f***? It also turns out that Tommy is somewhat Native American, as he's sent on a spirit quest during his search for the Zeo Crystal, and we find out that his brother was raised by a Native American tribe, and he was also guided there by a falcon, the same as his Ninja Zord in the previous series. But it's not like they'd go and do something stupid like make him the Red Ranger. They made him the f***ing Red Ranger. They made the Red Ranger Native American and then sent the only black girl in the show back to Africa. How do you even follow that? So I think it's pretty safe to say that despite the fact that Power Rangers and Zyuranger shared footage, the two shows aren't anything alike. All this time I'd assumed that while they had some significant differences, they were based on the same concept. But they're not, there's almost no comparison. And in many ways the Japanese show is a lot darker as well. There is some lightheartedness, but the storyline would be equally appealing to adults, even if it is a bit out there. Well, anyway, that ended up being quite a long-winded comparison of the two shows, but they're not the easiest things in the world to explain. And normally, this is where everything would blow up and the video ends, but not this time. We've got something a little bit special. Roll Japanese credits. 水を含んだ運河お米作ろう田んぼ夕が丸くて青いことを誰だって知っているけどずっと昔はわから